Good evening and welcome to tonight's January 4th, 2023 school committee meeting. My name is Lindsay Heffernan. I'm the chair, and I'd like to start, as we always do, by thanking Liz Poplowski, who keeps us both on time, but is a member of the Shrewsbury Media Connection, for recording and live broadcasting our meeting tonight. This meeting will be rebroadcast on Channel 29 between now and our next regularly scheduled meeting at 2 weeks from now, and is also available on the SMC YouTube channel. The first item on our agenda is public participation, and tonight nobody has expressed interest in addressing the committee. However, in the future, if anybody wishes to participate in this portion of the meeting, they should contact the chairperson prior to beginning the meeting. Once recognized, speakers may have up to 3 minutes to present their material. The committee will also review and consider written comments, which may be presented to us either before or after our meetings. And if you're joining us tonight for our public hearing, slightly different than public participation regarding sleep, health, and school start times. Just to clarify, we'll be getting to those agenda items shortly. I would welcome anybody who's here for that. There is a sign-up sheet on the small table there to your right or left, wherever you're seated, so we can document the names and addresses properly for the record. Next item on the agenda is chairperson and members' reports. Do we have anything, Mr. Palich?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a personal item for members' reports tonight. My current term on the school committee, my third, will come to a close with Shrewsbury's annual town election on May 2nd. I am announcing tonight that I will not be a candidate for re-election to a fourth term, and instead want to highlight an opportunity for someone new to step into this role. Serving on this committee has been the honor of a lifetime. I am immensely proud of what Shrewsbury Public Schools has achieved during my 3 terms, including the construction of a new K-4 elementary school, the passage of 2 badly needed operational overrides, and among other things, of course, finally achieving tuition-free full-day kindergarten for all students. Despite this progress, obviously, we still face substantial challenges. I have every confidence in our district's leadership and staff that these challenges will be met as others have been before them. I also feel, however, that this is the right moment for someone with a fresh perspective to step onto the committee. So with that, I am going to be stepping off when my term ends in a few months. To be able to have had the chance to give back to the district that gave me so much when I was a Shrewsbury Public Schools student K through 12 has been deeply rewarding. I look forward to the work ahead over the coming 4 months as I finish out this term. And after the term ends, will continue to be a proud and vocal advocate for our schools after my time on the committee concludes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Palich. We were going to have many opportunities to talk about your contributions over your 9 years on this committee, so we'll save those for not tonight, another night. But thank you. Any other committee members' comments? Yes, Ms. Fritz, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Jason. I know we've worked together for a long time, so we will have. You still have a lot of work to do before we get to the end. We'll have time to thank you. And I would also like to announce that after very careful consideration, discussion with my family, I have decided to seek another term on the school committee at the annual town meeting in May. So I just want to make that announcement.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fritz. And with that, I think I'll turn over to our next agenda item, and that is superintendent's report. Dr. Sawyer.
Thank you. Let me start by also, I know we'll recognize him in the springtime, but thanking Mr. Palich for his service, and always appreciated his support of our staff, our families, our students most importantly, and certainly the support of myself and the leadership team. And certainly, I know it makes me proud and so many others that to see an alum do so well, not only representing his community through this important leadership role, but also all your successes personally and professionally. And you certainly will be missed from being on the committee. I do want to just mention a couple things. There's been some updates we provided from time to time on our new RISE program. We have finalized the lease with Chatcheroni Properties for the Main Street property, the former Walgreens, previous to that Rite Aid, previous to that Brooks, previous to that Hale Drugs, I believe, so depending on how long you've been in Shrewsbury. It's a wonderful property. We're very pleased that they responded to our request for proposals, and we're able to arrive at an agreement. And there's some work being done on the property now. We hope to be in it in the next couple of months. This, again, is for the program for our special education students who are in our transition program, students who require special education support from the time they turn 18 and leave our Shrewsbury High School program until they turn age 22. And this is, there will be a retail business at that location that the students will run, similar to other programs around the central Massachusetts area. Probably the best-known one is in Westboro, the Sugar Shack, which our colleagues in Westboro have been so successful in putting together. And we're looking forward to that. And I would call people's attention to a recent podcast that the folks with the Town Center Association put together. Moira Miller and Mary Beth Lynch interviewed Meg Belcito, our Assistant Superintendent for Student Services. The name of the podcast is Center Pieces, which can be found on Apple and all other, I assume, formats. But I think it's it's an interview with Meg as well as with Mel Ciacciaroni from Ciacciaroni Properties that really talks about our inclusiveness of our programming and what this promises to be a real, I think, boon to our town center and a really great opportunity for both our students and our community will benefit as well. So I call people's attention to that. I also found out today in the podcasting world that our town manager, Kevin Mizikar, now has a podcast as well, so I'll need to look for that. It sounds like the writing might be on the wall, but this is a new expectation perhaps, but we will see. But I actually found that out at a town department head meeting that Mr. Collins and I attended this afternoon at the Shrewsbury Public Library. And I was reminded once again how fortunate we are to have not only just such a strong leadership team and employees across all of our town departments, but that there is just such a high level of collaboration. I know that's not always the case in every community, so I feel very fortunate that we're able, as the school department, to interact so positively with the other departments in town in order to try to make Shrewsbury a great place to live and work and raise a family. And that is Superintendent's report this evening.
Great, thank you so much. And our first time scheduled appointment tonight is on sleep health and school start times, our survey results, and that is a report. For clarification for those watching, at our December 2022 school committee meeting, our last school committee meeting, representatives from the Sleep Health Advisory Committee presented two options for potential changes to the school schedules for next year. And from December 15th to the 23rd, students, staff, parents, and caretakers had an opportunity to provide feedback regarding these potential schedule changes via stakeholder surveys. So tonight, I know we have Dr. Lazat with us, along with members of the feedback task force group, to present a report summarizing the results of that survey. Those were provided to the school committee members under a separate cover, so we have had a chance to review those. And
Thank
Dr.
you.
Sawyer,
And I'm gonna start off, and Dr. Lazat will be making the presentation, but let me just begin by thanking everyone who's participated. The feedback's been incredibly valuable, and I look forward to you hearing a summary. Let me just begin, though. There are some people, of course, who are tuning in, maybe for the first time, as they've heard, the news of the options that were presented to the school committee in December. By the start time or the Sleep Health Advisory Committee. And so this evening, the purpose here is to review these statistics and summaries of feedback from 3 stakeholder groups who were surveyed about the options that were presented, our students, our families, and our staff, and we'll also remind people of the next steps in our timeline. Just for those, to make sure there's context for people who are watching, currently our start times are our high school at 7:35, ends at 2 o'clock. Our middle schools begin at 8 and end at 2:35. These are the student days when students' instruction begins and instruction ends. In our elementary schools, it's 9 to 3:15. Those are our current ones. And you see the red highlighted piece there. We don't actually have the same amount of time in between each of the tiers of the schedule, and that causes some issues with transportation and something that we're trying to address through this process as well. There were some guiding principles we used to develop these options, looking at what's biologically necessary for high school students and maintain and increase the length of those sleep opportunities afforded to students at the middle and elementary levels as well. Maintain the same general pattern of busing, equalize the time between the tiers, as I just mentioned. Standardizing the length of the school day across all schools because they vary slightly a bit. The middle school day is actually 10 minutes longer than the high school, and the elementary day is 10 minutes shorter than the high schools currently. To really recognize and consider changes and the impact on the schedule on family and staff childcare. Trying to avoid having the high school in their day so late that it would significantly impact co-curricular activities, employment, or sibling care. And to avoid having students either wait in the morning or get dropped off in the bus in the dark. Those are some constraints that we were looking at and trying to figure out what's an approach that might make sense. The advisory committee hasn't recommended an option yet. They're going to be meeting, and they're going to be recommending on January 18th at the school committee's next meeting, will recommend their preferred solution to this issue. And so the feedback is something that the advisory committee has reviewed, was continuing to review. The feedback that we'll hear tonight at the public hearing will be taken under consideration as well. This is a process. I think that's important for people to note. So the options that were presented for potential changes, the first was to move all of the start times a little bit later and to spread them out according to those 40-minute intervals. So the high school under this option would start at 7:55, end at 2:20. The middle schools would start at 8:35 and end at 3. And then the elementary schools would begin at 9:15 and end at 3:40. Again, this is the student day for each of those schools. For option B, it's the same times, but just flipping the middle schools and the high school. So the middle schools would begin at 7:55 and end at 2:20. The high school would then start at 8:35 and end at 3, with the elementary schools the same as option A, 9:15 to 3:40. This is a slide that was created by one of our student members of the advisory committee, Sanjula, and just kind of gives a color-coded version. You can see the orange cells are high school, green is the middle school level, and purple is elementary. And you can see sort of currently versus option A and option B, just a quick visual to orient people to the issues. One question that's come up, and I know it'll be addressed in our FAQ presentation later, is whether or not we would look at changing the elementary start time. And that's something that was looked at very carefully by the advisory committee. I'm not a member of the advisory committee, but I facilitated their meetings, and so I've been present for all of their conversations and their research. Looking at whether or not that made sense to put them into the, one of the earlier tiers or the first tier. There was some feedback from the Thought Exchange that polled constituents back in November as to what their questions or concerns might be about a change in schedule. That was not positive about flipping elementary, which I know has happened in some other districts. There's some other districts that have swapped it or proposed swapping it, and actually reported to us that was one of the reasons they did not make any change to their schedule, because there was so much opposition to moving elementary students to being the first tier, and that it had the most impact on childcare needs, would really push the high school much later in the sense of impacting their, potentially impacting those co-curricular activities as one of our guiding principles, and some other elements around extended school care. So that certainly was considered. It was not brought forward by the advisory committee as a recommended option. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Lizotte, who's going to take us through a lot of data. She's going to give a high level, some bullets here. I will mention and that all of the full surveys themselves will be posted on the website sometime tomorrow, along with the slide decks from tonight, and the FAQ document that's been created as well, which we'll refer to a little bit later. So, in full transparency, anyone will be able to look at the data themselves in more detail. But at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Lizotte, and she'll give you some information about what the surveys said.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. And I want to thank all of the students, parents, caretakers, and staff members who took time out of their very busy lives to participate and contribute to the surveys. We had 702 students from Shrewsbury High School, Oak, and Sherwood participate, 513 parents and caretakers from all district schools, and 362 staff members from all district schools. I'll break down tonight's presentation by stakeholder groups, starting with students, moving on to parents and caretakers, and then to staff. So the survey is asked to indicate level of support for each proposed option in order to provide more sleep opportunity for students. That was the goal of this sleep advisory team, and to rank the two proposed options compared to the current schedule. Stakeholders also provided written feedback on each option and on what they perceived as benefits and challenges to those two proposed schedule changes in addition to our current schedule. So beginning with the student feedback, we had, as I mentioned, 702 students in total. 311 of those students from Shrewsbury High School, 254 from Oak Middle School, and 139 from Sherwood Middle School respond. The student feedback regarding option A, the key data points that I'd like to highlight, 45% of students combined chose support or strongly support for option A. 33% of students combined chose do not support or strongly do not support option A. As we move on to student feedback by grade span regarding option A, and as you look at the graph in the green is the strongly support, blue support, the orange neutral, teal blue perhaps, do not support, and the red strongly do not support. But we had more support for option A among Sherwood students, with similar levels of support among Oak and Shrewsbury High School students. Students who strongly support, range from 42% to 50% across the three schools regarding option A, while a range of 30% to 33% of students do not support or strongly do not support option A across these three grade spans. As far as option B goes, for student feedback, key points here include 44% of students combined chose support or strongly support for option B, with more choosing strongly support compared to option A. There was a 30% versus 20% differential there. 43% of students combined chose do not support or strongly do not support option B, with more choosing strongly do not support compared to option A. And there's a 27% versus 14% differential. As we move on to student feedback by grade span regarding option B, more support for option B among Oak students, followed by Sherwood, and then Shrewsbury High School. Option B keeps the middle school start time about the same as it is currently. Compared with option A, significantly more students at Shrewsbury High School do not support option B, which shifts the Shrewsbury High School hours to 8:20 to 3:30 p.m. As we move along to student preferences regarding ranking options, 64% of students prefer later start times, either option A or B. Option A was chosen by 30%, option B chosen by 34%, and the current schedule, the schedule we now have, chosen by 31% as their first choices. Option A is the most preferred second choice with 44%. So the weighted overall rankings out of a 4-point scale, where the first choice is 4 points, second choice 3 points, etc., show that option A is most preferred, 2.93 points, followed by the current schedule, 2.78 points, and then option B last with the 2.67 points out of the 4-point scale. As we look at student comparisons by grade span regarding ranking options, key data points here, and it's hard to see, I'm sure, from Homer if you're in the audience, but as Dr. Sawyer mentioned, this will be on the website tomorrow. Option A is the first here, followed by option B, followed by the current schedule. Key data points here, 54% of Shrewsbury High School students preferred either option A at 22% or option B at 32% as their first choice, while 43% of Shrewsbury High School students prefer the current schedule. Option A was ranked much higher than option B for the current schedule. Option A was ranked much higher than option B or the current schedule as a second choice for Shrewsbury High School students. So 61% option A versus 9% versus 21%. Middle school students ranked both schedule change options as stronger preferences than the current schedule at the middle schools. The shaded sections here are statistically significant differences among the levels being compared, And again, you'll get a better look at that at some point tomorrow when we can see those on the website. So the overall themes that we gleaned from the student feedback, those that support change include additional sleep is very important to our mental and physical health. Changing schedules for lessons, practices, etc. seems manageable and does not result in significant negative consequences. More sleep leads to more focused learning and a better attitude. Student feedback themes, as those relate to opposing or questioning change. Students prefer to get out of school at 2 o'clock due to sports, jobs, and activities after school. Getting out later in the afternoon would be challenging due to after-school responsibilities. Secondly, changing the high school schedule by 20 minutes or so really isn't worth the change for all involved. And finally here, I am on this slide, I am used to the current schedule and prefer not to change it. So those were themes that were repeated throughout the data. Moving along to our second group, the family feedback, parent caretakers and families regarding proposed start time options. Again, we had a total of 513 parents and caretakers respond and participate in the survey. The key data points as those relate to option A include 58% of families combined chose support or strongly support for option A. 28% of families combined chose do not support or strongly do not support option A. As that same family feedback relates to grade span regarding option A, key data points here include combined responses for support, strongly support for option A is very similar across all 4 groups, ranging from 57% to 59% of parents and caretakers. Secondly, combined responses for do not support or strongly do not support range from 26% to 30%. As we move along to option B, as far as family feedback, key data points, 44% of families combined chose support or strongly support for option B, compared to 58% for option A. 46% of families combined chose do not support or strongly do not support for option B, with more choosing strongly do not support compared to option A. So there was a difference, 29% versus 15%. As we look at family feedback by grade span for option B, key data points here, there are 2, include more pronounced differences in choice of support, strongly support for option B, with 54% for Shrewsbury High School, approximately 40% for the middle level, and 29% for K-4 parents and caretakers. And finally, 43% of Shrewsbury High School parents and caretakers chose strongly support for option B, compared with 29% for option A, and this is almost exactly the opposite of Sherwood families. Family preferences regarding ranking options. Few data points here. 71% of families prefer later start times, either option A or option B. Option A was chosen by 37%, option B by 34%, and the current schedule by 28% as their first choices. Option A is the most preferred second choice with 47%. And again, as we look at the weighted overall ratings out of 4 points, where the first choice is 4 points, second choice is 3, and so on, show that option A is most preferred, 3.19 points, followed by option B, 2.72 points, and then the current schedule, 2.66 points as those relate to family preference. Few last data points here for family comparisons by grade span regarding ranking options. A change in schedule for either option A or option B is the first choice of 77% of Shrewsbury High School families. 34% choosing option A, 43% option B, while 23% of Shrewsbury High School parents and caretakers chose our current schedule as their first choice. About 73% of middle school families prefer either option A or B, with a slight preference for option A at 40% first choice versus option B, 33% first choice, and the current schedule first choice at 26%. For elementary families, 43% ranked option A first, 19% option B, and 37% of elementary families prefer the current schedule as their first choice. So as we look at the family feedback themes in support of change, these options address the issue of the high school starting too early. Either option is far better than doing nothing. Options A and B provide the opportunity for students at all levels to get adequate sleep. More sleep time for kids leads to healthier and happier lives. The options provide a good balance between school, extracurriculars, and time at home. Kids need more sleep. These options provide additional time for important morning routines. High school students will be available to help with elementary school-age siblings. Those were the top themes in the survey, data from family as far as supporting change. And though the themes focused on opposing or questioning change include elementary students wake earlier in the morning and are stronger learners during the morning hours. Their stamina decreases as the day progresses. Concern regarding after-school activities that begin at 4 o'clock for elementary students. Perceptions that some elementary students could arrive home in the dark during the winter months. The options have some benefits, but unsure that the benefit of 20 to 30 minutes of additional sleep is enough to warrant the disruption of changing school schedules at all levels. And finally, our third group, our staff feedback, our staff group, regarding the proposed start time options. As I mentioned, we had 362 total respondents from staff, 100 of those folks being from Shrewsbury High School, 55 from Oak, 59 from Sherwood, and 152 from the elementary level, with 4 from the preschool level and 9 district level staff who participated in this SurveyMonkey survey. Staff feedback regarding option A, 2 key data points here. 23% of staff combined chose support or strongly support for option A. 62% of staff combined chose do not support or strongly do not support option A, with 38% choosing strongly do not support. Staff feedback by grade span regarding option A. 2 points here. The first includes significantly more support for option A among SHS staff compared to other levels. Elementary and Oak Middle School staff have the least level of support for option A. Staff feedback as it relates to option B, 33% of staff combined chose support or strongly support option B, compared to 23% for option A. 58% of staff combined chose do not support or strongly do not support option B, with more choosing strongly do not support, slightly less than for option A, where that was 62%. As we look at staff feedback by grade span regarding option B, significantly more support for option B among Oak and Sherwood Middle School staff compared to Shrewsbury High School and the elementary levels. Less support from Shrewsbury High School staff and the least amount of support from elementary staff for option B. And as we look at ranking options as those relate to staff preferences, 66% of staff prefer the current schedule as their first choice. Option B was chosen by 21%, and option A chosen by 12% as staff first choices. Option A is the most preferred second choice with 41%. The weighted overall rankings here out of 4 points show that the current schedule is most preferred, 3.46 out of 4 points from staff. And options A and B have virtually the same rankings at 2.52 and 2.50. Finally, staff comparisons by grade span regarding ranking options. Key data points here include the current schedule is the first choice of 62% of Shrewsbury High School staff, 44% of middle school staff, and 87% of elementary staff. When comparing the two options for change, middle level staff prefer option B, which is almost the same as their current schedule, compared to option A, while Shrewsbury High School staff rank option A higher than option B, and elementary staff rank them about the same. The shaded sections here that you likely cannot see, but we'll see later this week, are statistically significant differences among the levels being compared. That first here again being A, second B, and the last our current schedule. So staff feedback themes supporting change include the high school start time is too early for students. Students require additional sleep. The extra time gives more flexibility in the morning, yet ends early enough that activities still have plenty of time to occur at a reasonable hour. The slightly later dismissal time will likely not impact after-school jobs, sports, and activities. Shifts at the other schools feel manageable. Better than no change, hopeful that SPS will truly support student wellness in the area of sleep health. Feel the change is not too drastic. And staff feedback themes opposing or questioning the change include these options have the greatest negative impact on staff, students, and families at the elementary level. Elementary-age children wake early and are most productive during the morning hours. The younger the child, the more easily they tire. Concerns regarding elementary students' ability to make after-school activities, clubs, and sports on time. Similar concerns for staff members with school-aged children and/or staff members who are interested in leading after-school activities that may now start and end later in the day. Finally, changes in school start and end times will negatively impact staff who work other jobs after school and/or who need to care for family members, including young children who need to be picked up from daycare and after-school programs outside of Shrewsbury. So the key takeaways that we found as a committee, a significant amount of data has been received from students, staff, and families. This data, collected via Thought Exchange and SurveyMonkey, has been carefully reviewed and analyzed by all members of the Sleep Health Advisory Committee, including Shrewsbury High School students, parents at all levels, educators, and school and district leaders. Students at the middle and high school levels reported both schedule change options as stronger preferences than the current schedule, with a preference for option A. A majority of families also supported a schedule change to provide the benefits of more sleep, with responses varied depending on the age of the student, more support from parents and caretakers of older students. First choices were about the same for options A and B, but with more strong opposition to option B from families. The first choice of 62% of Shrewsbury High School staff is to maintain the current schedule. This opinion is shared by 44% of middle school staff and 87% of elementary staff. When comparing the two proposed options for change, middle-level staff prefer option B, which I mentioned closely mirrors their current schedule at the middle level, compared to option A, while Shrewsbury High School staff rank option A higher than B. Elementary staff rank options A and B about the same. Times are the same in those two options for elementary, though they vary from the current schedule. Members of all stakeholder groups acknowledge the mental and physical benefits of more sleep that research shows will positively affect students' health and their ability to succeed in school. Concerns regarding the impact that the potential changes will have on after-school commitments for students, staff, and families were shared by all stakeholder groups. There are clear differences in support for change among the three stakeholder groups. Where students and families are supportive overall of schedule changes to realize the benefits of more sleep, while a significant majority of staff members at the different levels see the impact of changes as too disruptive and prefer the current schedule as it stands.
And so appreciate Dr. Lizotte presenting all that information in as concise a way as we could. Just to remind people who are maybe tuning in for the first time, this evening after we'll have a report with some FAQs from members of the advisory committee. We will have a public hearing where the school committee can listen to feedback from stakeholders. At the next school committee meeting on January 18th, there will be a recommendation for the Sleep Health Advisory Committee's recommended option. Obviously, would like the committee to discuss what the options are on the recommended option. That will be the first time, if the school committee saw fit, to actually choose something and vote. However, January 25th is being held as a potential additional meeting for further discussion and a potential vote. And my recommendation has been that the decision's made no later than your February 1st meeting, so that there's enough time to prepare and implement any potential schedule changes for the beginning of the 2023-2024 school year, which is about 7 months out from there. So with that, before we shift to our FAQ group, if there are any questions or comments from the school committee for Dr. Lizotte or myself relative to the data found in the surveys.
Thank you. And Dr. Lizotte, I'd like to thank you for presenting obviously a lot of complex information, and ranked choice voting is a little complicated to get it there, and really want to express my appreciation for the over 1,500 people who responded to give us this amount of feedback, certainly on behalf of, I think, all of my colleagues. Any particular questions that the committee members have on the survey results? No. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Lizotte. And I think our next item then is some members of the advisory committee here to share some frequently asked questions that the district is receiving. Some recurrent questions and issues have been brought up through the survey feedback from stakeholders that have been consolidated and addressed in an frequently asked questions report compiled by members of the Sleep Health Advisory Committee. And two members of that committee, Cynthia Murphy and Dr. Terrell Parikh, are here tonight, I'm sure along with Dr. Sawyer, to address some of those questions, and that will also be available publicly, I believe, tomorrow.
Correct.
Yes, okay.
We will make that document available, and we do have the single website. I did send the link out with today's reminder of the meeting. We'll send it out again. There's one web page that has all of the reports and information that the Sleep Health Advisory Committee has produced, and all these links will go up there as well. And I want to thank Dr. Parikh and Ms. Murphy for presenting and for their participation, along with other members of the Sleep Health Advisory Committee, Irene Drabkin, Noel Freeman, Kristen Ditch, and Sarah Russell, thank you. I was blanking on Sarah's last name, who all behind the scenes took a look at the survey data. Obviously, all the committee members have looked at the survey data, but they took time over the school break to really look at it carefully and come up with what recurring themes were, and come up with what we hope will be a very helpful, I believe will be a very helpful FAQ document, which they will summarize in this slide deck this evening. So with that, I will turn it over to, I believe, Ms. Murphy at this point.
Yes, thank you for having us. And as Dr. Sawyer said, my name is Cynthia Murphy, and I am the parent of a Shrewsbury High School sophomore. And I joined the Sleep Health Advisory Committee back in September 22, and I've been working exclusively on the research task force up until this past winter break, where I volunteered to be on this facts, just to put together this fact sheet. So basically what we did was we scanned through all of the comments, and we looked for some frequent themes, and the most pressing questions that came up from faculty, staff, families, and also students. And so what you're seeing are basically the biggest questions that needed to be addressed, so we're responding to those. So the first question is, why is changing the school start times even being considered? And the idea here is this is not something that's new. It's not a topic that's new. It has 30+ years of research behind it. And big organizations like the American Academy for Sleep Medicine, the American Academy for Pediatrics, the National Sleep Foundation all recommend 8 to 10 hours of sleep for that 13 to 18 age group, which is the Shrewsbury High School population. So it's not something new. The problem is students are not getting, in that age group, are not getting the required sleep. They have that biological circadian shift, the circadian clock shift. So it's very difficult for them to go to sleep as early as they did in middle school and elementary school. They're going to sleep later, but yet this is the population that has to be up the earliest. Some of the students have to be at the bus stop by 6:19 a.m. To make it for the 7:35 a.m. current start time. So it causes a sleep deficit, and what that sleep deficit is linked to are major physical, social, emotional, academic problems. So that's why we are considering this delayed school start time issue. And the second question, do our Shrewsbury High School students really experience sleep deprivation? And the answer to that is yes. So there was a Shrewsbury High School regional youth health survey that came out in 2021, and we found that actually 80% of the students are reporting not getting the recommended, so the majority, 80% not getting the recommended 8 to 10 hours of sleep. Only 20% are getting that time. And 50%, so I'm looking at the first bullet point there, of Shrewsbury High School students report getting 6 or fewer hours of sleep. And as we've noted in the research, and you can look at the report that we came out with, it has multiple negative effects ranging from just poor grades and academic, basically their performance isn't as good. So something minor like that, not that that's a big issue, but it could also be, like a life or death issue, like motor vehicle crashes, so safety issues like that, sports injuries. It also could result in things like addiction and obesity and mental health issues like suicide ideation. So yes, and that is something that our Shrewsbury High School students are experiencing. Will changing start times solve the problem of high school students being sleep deprived, and will other ways to improve sleep health, such as homework and technology use, be addressed to improve student physical and mental health? So the answer to that is kind of like a yes and no. So first of all, it's a big complex puzzle that delaying the school start times is just one piece to help solve that problem. It is basically something that it's a health issue that needs a multi-tiered approach, and so looking at sleep hygiene and educating the community about sleep hygiene and how to optimize the environment for students so that they can go to sleep and get the required amount of sleep. So examples such as limiting their technology use late at night, maybe creating an environment that's comfortable and relaxing in which they can fall asleep. So that's just one part of the problem, but it is something that we can manage, that we have like sort of the ability to modify, and other things that we will need to be addressed at another time.
I think, and if I just may add, I think one of the key points here is that, kind of in the second bullet, that even if all the other things are being followed in terms of experts' recommendations and kids' technologies put away and all those things are in place, just given the biology, if most adolescents typically can't fall asleep until around 11 o'clock at night, that's the typical piece, even if they're already in bed, their wake time is still too early based on the current schedule. So that's that's the conundrum that we're facing.
Right. And does this proposed change make enough of an impact on student sleep to be worthwhile? And the answer to that is also yes. It seems like it's not a huge difference between 7:35 a.m. to the option A, which is 7:55. That's only 20 minutes of a difference. But research shows that even slight changes, even slight delays, even just 10 minutes or more will allow for greater sleep opportunities for students, and actually does result in sleep durations that are larger. And then also we have the busing tier. We're trying to equalize the busing tiers and to help, again, create meaningful, to fill in the gaps, to fill in that sleep deficit. And a question that came up a lot, won't students just stay up later if school starts later? And that's such a logical question. One would think that that's the case, but studies show, in this huge study that's here on the slide, 28,000 suburban students in Colorado, they do go to sleep a little bit later, but they also get to sleep in a lot later. And so what's happening is they're ending up getting more sleep overall throughout the week. And so it's really helping them to be more alert and more energized and report fewer, less drowsiness throughout the day. And then this is also a really good question, a pressing question for anybody who's sort of resisting any kind of change. Will having later start times leave our high school students unprepared for college and workplace start times in the real world? And of course, we want to prepare our children, we want to prepare our students for workplace success. The problem here is that we're comparing apples to oranges. So as far as comparing students in the high school level, 13 to 18-year-olds, comparing their developmental needs and their actual biological physical needs for sleep is not the same as adults' needs. And so it's not really toughening them up for that. It's actually, we really need to consider meeting their needs is the point here. And so so that's really, it kind of stops there in terms of preparing them for the workplace. It's really just interrupting their ability to succeed. And, we talked all about the academic and the social and the emotional and the physical problems that could ensue if they're not getting the sleep that they need. And this great example of looking at the differences between developmental stages, like this 3-year-old needs a nap, right? And but stopping that 3-year-old from taking the nap to get them ready for first grade is counterproductive, right? That doesn't make sense. So that's the last question that I'm going to be answering. I'm going to turn it over to Toro.
So the other question is, why not just have all of the schools start at the same time? It doesn't make sense in a lot of ways, well, not a lot of ways, but a few ways in this, that some parents or some families have kids in elementary school versus middle school and high school, and if they did want to take them or not, they just can't be in the same place at the same time. So that would be the first thing. And then secondly, we don't want to increase costs for the school district, which means we're not trying to provide more buses. We're trying to do this in a way that we can keep costs where they are and still make it feasible for everybody. So that was the reason for that. So the other question was about the kids waking up later. It's just for the younger kids that they do better in the morning and then they're going to be too tired to learn in the afternoon. So we did look at different things. We looked at flipping them with the other, like flipping elementary school with high school, and then we decided against that because then that's going to put the elementary kids out too late. We don't want them to be out in the dark. So, we decided that wouldn't make the most sense for them, just safety-wise and comfort-wise. And then, people are concerned that now if the times change, what's going to happen? But in the past, Beale was always starting at 9:15 and ended at 3:30, and we did fine. The district did fine. The students did great. So there was really none of that being a concern going forward because we have seen it done well within our district in the past. So that is reassuring. That being said, we're still trying to consider and see if there's anything else that can be done for the elementary age kids before we make our final recommendation, because we understand that that is a great concern for people. But it's been done elsewhere throughout Massachusetts, and everyone is fine. So then another fair question is that none of these options that we're presenting works for certain families. But the problem with that is that change is hard for everyone. Even the current situation may not work for certain families. I mean, we're both parents of sophomores. it's not easy to see these kids having to struggle in the morning, whether, I'm really strict about they have to be in bed at a certain time, can't have electronics, no technology. But the circadian rhythm is the circadian rhythm. You can't argue with that. So they can't fall asleep until they can fall asleep. And if we can try to help protect their mental health, protect their physical health, then this is one way of doing it. And the places around us, Westboro, Northboro, Southboro, Newton, just a bunch of other cities around here have already done it. But California has implemented a state law where no high school can start before 8:30 a.m. So there's obviously some need for this. Anyway, so that's the whole thing, is that change is going to be hard for everyone, but it's been done successfully in our neighboring towns, so I have confidence that Shrewsbury can handle it as well. So then there's also, of course, legitimate concerns for everyone, which is what happens for staff to get out of their personal appointments. But this is also a concern that is, since certain schools will start later, maybe you can do things earlier in the morning. Some appointments will allow for that. Everyone's going to face some challenges because of this, but if we try to keep in mind that it's really for the mental well-being, decreased suicide rates, decreased accident rates for the older kids, that's going to be the priority. And other people in other jobs that don't have such a great time or somehow have to figure it out. So hopefully we'll be able to do that for our staff as well.
Oops, sorry.
No, so the other concern is always what's going to happen for the high school students or the middle school students that are watching the elementary kids. We've tried to do this in a way where it's not going to affect anybody. Those kids will still be home at the right time to be able to take care of the younger siblings because, again, we're trying to limit costs. We don't want to inconvenience people in those ways because obviously financials are important. Also, we did the child care task force, checked with about 250 local area daycare providers, and the ones that we were able to get in touch with for the most part said that they would be able to accommodate our needs if possible. And that's why we're trying to do this so early on, so they have time for flexibility in making this happen. So fortunately, as far as extended school care is concerned, that really won't have to change. It'll stay open from 7 a.m. till 6 p.m. after school, so that wouldn't be a big difference. It would affect staffing hours, where they would have some less time in the afternoon for work hours, but those same people could potentially be doing more hours in the morning if they wanted to do it that way. So traffic is another big concern. We obviously can't exactly say this is how things are going to go, but we don't foresee it to be a problem because we're still going to continue the 3-tier busing model. So there's not going to be additional buses. It's not going to create additional traffic. The times will just be adjusted, and we're trying to increase the length of time also in between, and that would be potentially more helpful as well. So this is the big thing that comes up a lot for high schoolers. Why not make them do more things? Take away their electronics, shut down social media, and you can do all of that, and you probably should do all of that as a family and as parents. But like I said earlier, it just doesn't make a difference as far as that being the only thing that's done. If that's the only thing that's done, these kids are still not going to be able to fall asleep earlier. And our research has shown that they aren't going to sleep earlier, and that's specifically for Shrewsbury High School students, that's not other districts, that's us specifically. And a lot of the research that was done was before cell phones even existed. So that's also something that requires, attention. The main thing is that these kids need to be getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep at night. If they're not, that's where, just think back to like any of yourselves. If you don't get a good night's sleep, you're cranky, you're groggy, you're not paying attention, you're making silly mistakes. We can't afford for these kids to be doing that on a long-term basis. They have school, they need to be able to function and learn and be productive and potentially drive home after school. We don't want mistakes there. So those are the concerns, and that's why we need to make sure that they're getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep. If they're getting picked up by the bus at 6:19 a.m. and they're not able to fall asleep until 11, there's no way that they're even have the fighting chance of getting 8 hours of sleep. And that's what we're trying to achieve here. So we're doing this in hopes of obviously the kids having a better mental health, better physical health, just overall happiness. So based on this, or our timeline, obviously we're doing this today. We'll get to hear from some of the community also based on their concerns. And the 18th, some of us will come back to give their final recommendations for the Sleep Health Committee. And then if we need to, January 25th, we'll do another, and then potentially February 1st, we'll have to do one more. Questions?
Thank you very much. I appreciate there's an awful lot of work that has gone into all of this, and you are representing many people who are on this advisory committee, but thank you for being here this evening. Thank you for doing work over the holidays to get this together, as this has been, as people noted, the survey closed a few days before our winter break, so they've been processing an awful lot of information. Do we have any questions from committee members about some of those frequently asked questions? Okay. I'm going to thank you then, and going to turn to our next. Do you have anything to add, Dr. No?
Just, my thanks to Dr. Parikh and Ms. Murphy and everyone else who worked on it. And again, we will share the FAQ document itself, as well as these slides, but the FAQ document is more of a narrative, typical FAQ style type of piece, and I would encourage people to read it. Obviously there's been lots of reports and lots of information that's been provided. I think it's a concise way to get at some of the key questions that have been raised, and it's important that people try to be as informed as they can, hopefully as they give any additional feedback to the school committee in advance of a decision later this month.
Great. Thank you so very much. I'm going to turn then to our next agenda item, which is a public hearing on the proposed options on sleep health and school start times. So tonight, the public is invited to provide feedback to the committee and the administration regarding the proposed options for changes to school start times being considered in advance of a vote by the school committee, as we've discussed here later this month, or potentially in the first week of February. Tonight's an opportunity for the school committee members to listen and consider the perspective of the members of our community. This is not a time of debate or response by us to all of these, but really a chance to hear from you of what the impacts would be. And so I'd like to now, again, welcome those who wish to speak to sign up on the sign-up sheet so that we can note your participation in our record. And anybody who has signed up, I'm going to welcome you to come up to the microphone. Just before we begin, ask that you please state your name, your residence, and any affiliation if you have any. And I would also note, I want to thank, we have members of the Cub Scout Pack 62 here tonight, so I will remind all of us and encourage you to share any remarks in a respectful manner that you may have, however strong feelings you may have about some of these issues. So, and we're thrilled that you're with us. Thank you, gentlemen. So with that, I will open up our public hearing, and anybody who has signed up can feel free to approach the microphone.
Hello, my name's Tony Marciello. I'm from 45 Gold Street. I live at 45 Gold Street. If it's all right, I have some stuff that I prepared. I'll just hand it out.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm breaking the TV.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
So to start off, thank you guys all for everything you do. As somebody who moved to the community within the past 2 years, it's cool to see you guys in person. And also thank you to everyone who worked on the advisory committee. I appreciate anybody who is taking time to try and make some change in any direction. So in the sheet that I prepared for you all, there's a number of different points. A lot of them have already been mentioned. So I'm going to try and just touch on some of the things that I haven't heard tonight. But overall, it should be known, I am a Floral dad. I have one student at Floral currently. I'm going to have a second in the coming year and a half or 2 years. And also, my wife is also a teacher at Floral. So I have affiliation with that school and with the elementary program in general. And if the survey wasn't reflective of that enough already, the elementary side of the school system is not as pleased with all the options that are presented. And a couple of the things that I would point out, number one is really there just isn't, I don't see any positives for the elementary program with any of these options. There's a lot that is laid out for the high school students. There's a lot that is presented for their benefit, but it seems like there really isn't any benefit for the elementary students. In fact, if anything, there's things that are taken away from them as a result of these plans. Another point to mention is that quite frequently throughout all the presentations, there's been mention of the necessary 8 to 10 hours of sleep for students aged 13 to 18 years old, as recommended by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine also recommends 9 to 12 hours of sleep for students in the 6 to 12 age range. So if we were to consider their sleep for their young growing brains, then it is equally as important as that the 8 to 12 for the 13 to 18 year olds, or 8 to 10 for the 13 to 18 year olds. And to put that into some perspective, with the later start, I don't know when everybody puts their kids to bed, but I know my kids have a bedtime of 7 o'clock. Sometimes that goes to 7:30. You factor in dinner and activities and everything else. By the time they get home from school, we're talking about maybe 2-ish hours that are available. One of the meters that I use to gauge that is that by calling the end of the school day, ending the school day at 3:40, that means that dismissal will actually go until 3:55. So let's round up and call it 4 o'clock. You're going from 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock. You figure if there's any sort of activities in there, you have maybe 2 hours of family time, things like that are not spent just preparing kids for the day in the morning, which is where they would gain their extra time. It's already been mentioned about the how any of this might affect extracurricular activities for young students. I know my children specifically have dance classes that start at dance and gymnastics classes that do start at 4 o'clock. If there was a student who did have to take the bus, by the time this basically removes them from that. It excludes them basically from that sort of program. Also on the list here, I know there's been a number of references to the changes of Westboro and Northboro throughout this process. I did a comparative analysis, which if that sheet does go to the back there, of a number of different schools. If you're wondering how I came to this list, frankly honest, it was just a list of some of the best schools in the state and how they're doing it. I feel like these are the schools we should model ourselves on. And I'm proud to say that Shrewsbury schools were on many of the lists that I was finding. That being said, most of these schools start later and end earlier than we're proposing and even than we currently have now. So I think and Westboro and Northboro specifically, their elementary schools, Westboro goes from 8:50 and ends at 3:05, and Northboro starts at 8:20 and ends at 3 o'clock. The later, there's a second school in Northboro that ends as late as 3:25. So no matter what, we're talking about at least 15 minutes later of a scheduled release time than any of these schools, and in some cases closer to 30 or 40 something minutes. I know it was mentioned that elsewhere there are schools who are doing the same thing that we're doing. I have not been told which schools these schools elsewhere are. So if there's any more information that could be provided about other schools that are doing it exactly as we are, with the start and end date as late as 3:40, I would like to see it. And beyond that, I think, like I said, a lot of what's been a lot of my points have already been said. I think that early school start times are a contributor, but they're not the sole issue. And an issue of sleep problems for high schoolers, let's be real. There's no early later start time for schools that's going to prevent a kid from putting their phone down at 10, 11, midnight. It's just going to happen. And I think it was interesting to note that a lot of the studies that were referenced were before cell phones even existed. So that is another point to mention. And there was a slide, the final end conclusion, there was a slide of that noted why some other plans were rejected in this whole process. And it was for a lot of the same reasons that are going to hurt our elementary students. So it seems a little unfair to me that the reasons that other plans should be rejected because they would hurt our high school students are okay to hurt our elementary school students in the same ways. And that is, I think, everything. Thank you guys for everything, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Anybody else who would like to address the committee tonight? Just remind you to state your name, residence, and any affiliation that you have.
Hi, Rebecca Quinn, live at 15 Bryant Ave. I currently have twins in kindergarten, and I will have someone going to elementary school in about 4 years. I think Tony hit it right on the head. I will say I've been a high school educator in a neighboring district for 17 years, so I 100% agree with moving high school times back. But I do not agree with it at the expense of our elementary school students. My students right now do not get off their bus until 3:50, and they are not the last ones off. I know some of their friends do not get off until after 4. Pushing the times back even half hour, it is not fair for an elementary school student to get off a bus at 4:30. I know when my kids get off, they are spent. It's a long day. Adding that half hour will not be productive for our family and other families I have talked to. It's tough. And then, as Tony was saying, if they get home at 4:30 next year, how much time do parents then have with their children? You have an hour until dinner, and then it's baths, bedtime, maybe an activity if you can squeeze it in. So while I do support changing the high school hours, I do not think it should be done at the expense of our young students. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the committee this evening? All right. Going once. All right. And with that, I will close our public hearing. I would just like to note that appreciation for those who came out tonight and to share your feedback, and a public forum is not always the most comfortable place to do that, so I want to just really thank you for that. I want to also just express my personal gratitude to the folks who are here tonight and who have committed time on the Sleep Health Advisory Committee, noting a pretty robust process that we have gone through as a district, between the committee members who have met to review medical data and best practices from other districts, to try to understand the impacts to childcare. We very much do appreciate that this is a complicated issue and is hard to find a solution that will work for absolutely everybody. But between using the thought exchange to get community feedback, the other possibilities that were determined to be potentially feasible, having a survey there, we've had at least, I think this is our fourth meeting at the school committee level, and a webinar. So I want to just really express some gratitude to Dr. Sawyer and his team for running what I think is a really robust process, appreciating that it is complex and that it's really difficult. So I want to thank you, everyone who was here this evening. Dr. Sawyer, do you have any other closing comments on this matter tonight?
Just to, again, thank the two participants. Appreciate hearing your perspective for sure, and certainly that will be taken under consideration when the Sleep Health Advisory Committee meets again, as well as I know the school committee takes very seriously anyone who comes before them to share their perspective. We'll look forward to coming back at our next meeting with the advisory committee bringing what they think would be the best solution. Obviously, they will be looking very carefully at how the two options that were initially presented, whether there's the potential to make any adjustments. That's what their next task will be, to look at that. And it remains to be seen whether any adjustments might be feasible. You know, the logistics are different. I think one thing I would say, just in you know, I'm sure it's on the minds of those wondering, you know, it's a real strength in Massachusetts that we have lots of local smaller school districts. You know, other parts of the country, you'd have county-wide, sort of massive, you know, even talk about what that study, a 28,000 student suburban school district. That's, you know, far beyond what we typically see. We're considered to be a larger district in Massachusetts at about 6,000 students. You know, there are going to be differences that affect this issue that have to do with geography, have to do with, you know, where schools are located in town, what kind of busing requirements there are, how many families choose to walk to school based on that availability. You know, one of the things, our logistics piece, and again, we had these various task groups, logistics being one that looked at what other districts did. And, you know, the logistics group looked at it and essentially came up with, working with our bus vendor, that we're trying to solve some of the issues around buses, including the fact that, you know, at each level, really more for the middle and the high school, middle and elementary level in the afternoons, we have some buses that are running later than they should based on our start times and end times on paper. You know, I don't know for sure, and we'll try to bring this information to the next meeting, but just because, you know, a bus is dropping off at a particular point now this year, with the revised schedules, what we expect is that buses will actually be able to arrive at school and earlier within that dismissal window and get going sooner. So the impact may not be quite as much as what's on paper, a shift in the end time of the day. And that's something that we're going to be looking at carefully, because certainly none of us want kids getting home later than they need to be, even under the current schedule. And this is one way to try to fix that problem, because just as on the opposite side of the issue, as was mentioned, you know, we have a high school start time of 7:35, but we have kids getting picked up at 6:19 in the morning, 6:20 in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, and being delivered to the high school at around 7, because that's the only way those buses can get out on their middle school route and then get to the middle schools by 8 o'clock. So, you know, on paper, it looks better than it actually is. So that's one of the things that the Start Time Committee, I know, has been trying to address with a couple of these options that they've put forward. But, you know, I think, again, everyone has, you know, the best of intentions and wants the best for our students. Everyone has their own particular, you know, issues in terms of what their own family life or professional life or needs is. As was mentioned, I think, earlier, none of the solutions, including the current solution, meets everyone's needs. And any change that's made is going to affect everyone. I don't think anyone on the advisory committee is taking that lightly. I know certainly the school committee does not, and certainly the school district leadership doesn't. And I think that the point now is to take all the information that we've received, consider it all very carefully. And consideration, of course, doesn't always mean agreement, because obviously we're considering a bunch of perspectives, some of which are in opposition to one another. So whatever recommendation is made doesn't mean that someone wasn't heard. It just means that there was not necessarily agreement with that perspective, or they saw trade-offs in a different way. And there's going to be trade-offs no matter what the solution is. Keeping the status quo will involve trade-offs. Making changes will involve trade-offs. And the question is, how do you balance those things out in a way that tries to do the most good for ultimately for the students who are charged with their care and their well-being. So we'll look forward to the next piece in a couple of weeks, and again, we'll publish all of these on our website sometime tomorrow, and we'll look to send an email out to the community when those are available. But thank you to everyone who participated and everyone who's been you know, such a part, doing a lot of work to try to bring forward something that hopefully with the intent of doing good things for our kids. So thank you.
Thank you. While you're all welcome to stay, we are going to pivot to a different topic, and if you would like to get some younger people to bed, we understand that as well. Our next agenda item, thank you again, is under curriculum, and that is Shrewsbury High School testing and annual report. Each year, a report is presented that includes Shrewsbury High School student performance data on standardized tests, including SAT and AP, advanced placement exams. We have Principal Mr. Mazzillo and Ms. Angie Flynn, the Director of School Counseling, with us tonight to present a report and to be available to answer any questions. So Dr. Sawyer, do you have anything you want to say to kick this off, or should we turn it over to Mr. Bazidlo?
Just two things. One is a preview. Originally on our agenda, we also were going to have an MCAS report. Ms. Clowder unfortunately couldn't be with us this evening, so we're just going to have the high school testing report tonight. And I think that, this is a traditional report we've made, although there are some additions in terms of data this year that provide a little more specificity around different subgroups and whatnot, and look forward to hearing the information from Mr. Bazidlo and Ms. Flynn.
Well, great. Thanks for having us tonight, and we're pleased to present the committee and the community the results from our testing, students' testing pattern in SAT and AP tonight. It's going to be interesting as you look at some of the charts and graphs that we have. We broke down a number of things by race and reporting out race and ethnicity in terms of student performance, but also we take in the context of the pandemic. We'll make some comparisons pre-pandemic, pandemic, and post kind of pandemic where we are now, which was interesting to us in our conversations as we disaggregated the data. So I'll turn it over to Mrs. Flynn.
Okay, so the standardized tests that are offered to students at the high school level, there is the PSAT, which is the NMSQT, meaning that students can qualify for the National Merit Scholarship through their PSAT score, and then the plan. So the PSAT is a practice SAT, and the plan is a practice ACT. The SATs and the ACTs are the college admissions exam that students take. It's actually a little higher than 33% right now. I mean, this is ever changing as we speak. Who is requiring SAT and ACTs? I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But we've definitely seen a change since the pandemic. And there is, schools are now talking about test optional and test versus test blind. Test optional means that students, if they submit their scores, they will be considered for admissions. Test blind means that a college won't even look at the scores regardless if a student submits them. And then lastly is advanced placement exams, and those are given for college credit, or can be for college credit, I should say. So just some things to think about that we noticed this year is, well, back last year, the SAT was no longer offered for SAT essay and SAT subject tests. So those are no longer offered for students. As I said, sort of the pandemic changed who requires the SAT or the ACT, especially in this 21-22 cycle, and even in this 22-23 cycle. I think we're going to see something a little different in the 23-24 cycle. But, and because of this, you can see that the number of students who are taking the SAT has increased from last year nationally. So it's up by, it was 1.5 million for the class of 21, and now it's up to class of 20, and now it's up to 1.7 million. So, and that included our students as well. We had 52%, 239 test takers last year, and then, or in the class of 2020, and then in the class of 2021, we had 372 test takers. So it went to 81%. I think that just to note that we've already seen some schools requiring students to take the SAT and ACT, and some of those schools are schools like Purdue, MIT, so some of those schools have higher echelon. And even for students, even for schools that are saying they're test optional, when you look at the data, for instance, Georgetown, of their accepted students, only 7% didn't submit their SAT scores. So most students do submit SAT scores for college admissions to those types of schools. All right, so to talk about SATs, the scale is 200 to 800 for the reading, and 200 to 800 for the math. So 800 is the highest score you can receive, 200 is the lowest. So if you combine those, it's a 1600 scale. So if we look at the mean SAT scores for this year combined, so this is out of the 1600 point scale, you can see that Shrewsbury did have a 35-point drop from last year. However, I think that is because we've had more students take the SAT for the class of 2021. I think in the the class of 2022. In the class of 2021, students were self-selecting, I think, who thought they would score well. That was when the height of the pandemic, when most colleges were saying it was test optional. So if you look at our scores pre-pandemic, so 2018, 2019, 2020, you will see that we're actually trending upward in our scores. 2020, it was 1207, and now this year it's 1222. 2019, it was 1213. Our score this year is 1222. So if you take away that 2020 class of 2021, that was sort of a blip in there for the pandemic, we are actually trending upward. So this would be the same for our reading and writing score. Our score this year, the average score was 603, and that is clearly up from the class of 2020, which is 593. Again, a little lower from last year, but I do think, as I said, that's because we had less, students take it in the class of 2021. And you'll see the same thing for math here. The average score is 619 for Shrewsbury. And if you look for the previous years before 2021, we are definitely a little higher. And then this shows our participation rate. And, in 2021, we only had 52% of our students graduating seniors take the SAT. And in the class of 2022, we had 81%. So that's a big difference.
So we also, in years past, and including this year, took a look at how males and females compare both in the evidence-based reading and writing and mathematics. And on this top chart, the average score for males was 596, in Massachusetts was 567, and nationally was 526. For females, they outperformed males at Shrewsbury High School, 607 by 9 points. In Massachusetts, it was flat with 567 for females, and nationally 531 for females. Below is the math numbers as well. Males outperformed females at Shrewsbury High School, 628 to 611 for 17 points. In Massachusetts, males outperformed females, 576 to 548. And nationally, 530 to 512. We have another graphic representation of males in blue around the critical reading and writing scores, and in comparison to their female counterparts in red. And as you see, the males underperform females in the critical reading and writing, while they outperform females in mathematics. This is where we dug a little bit deeper, and this data is actually self-reported by students to the College Board. So whatever they report, we pull that data from the College Board. And what's interesting was within your packet and the report that you received, we took the three charts that compared the Massachusetts average of students that participate in the SAT, the Shrewsbury High School number of students, and the national, and kind of jammed it into, put them in one graph, so one chart, so everyone can see this versus going through three different iterations on three different slides. So if you look left to right, the categories of race and ethnicity are Asian, Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, white, multi-race, and no response. And as you see, the first column percentage, that's the percentage of students that took the SAT that identified within that race and ethnicity, and their combined score for Shrewsbury High School from top to bottom. And then we broke it out by the EBRW's evidence-based reading and writing and the math score. If there's statistically, there's not enough students within one particular category, for instance, a Black African American is non-reported for statistical reasons and self-identifying reasons. So we have a cohort of students that fell in that category that could be counted. If you look across, what's interesting to us as we talked about the data, we looked at each kind of group by race or ethnicity and looked at our percentage at Shrewsbury High School as compared to Massachusetts in the national level and performance levels. We're doing really well in terms of outperforming across the board in pretty much every level or every race or ethnicity, which I think is a good news story, but it also highlights some of the disparities we have with some of the learning that might be happening within those different race or ethnicity groups. So there's certainly a lot to digest and think about, and we're certainly having conversations about this, but it's another way to look at the data relative to how it's being reported to students to the College Board, and then how we look at it, disaggregate it, and then how it compares to both what's happening within the state and nationally. And we can take some questions after.
All right, moving on from SAT is PSAT. So this is the practice SAT. And this is when students take the PSAT, if they are a junior in 11th grade, they can qualify for the National Merit Scholarship. And this year we had 20 commended students, 3 finalists, and 1 scholarship recipient. The scholarship is usually about $2,500. The college will match it for another $2,500, so it can be a $5,000 scholarship.
We're talking about the top 1% of students that take
Yes.
this.
Yep.
That take the PSAT. So, advanced placement courses, for those in the audience that might not know from home, these are courses that are basically monitored or vetted by the College Board, where our teachers actually put forth a curriculum that gets submitted and gets approved, and then we deliver the curriculum, and at the end of the school year, students take a standardized test to evaluate their learning. Everyone across the country / world takes kind of the test at the same time, so there's different times, and it's pretty intense depending on where you live throughout the globe, but here in the US, it's kids, what we've seen is we're taking the tests on Eastern Standard Time. So the course, the AP stuff, just 4 quick highlights from the past year. We've had 448 students taking AP exams, which was 48 more than last year. We've hit our all-time high for AP exams administered at 976, which was 111 more than last year. 53% of seniors took a 1 AP exam, which is a really high percentage, but should be noted that students who participate in an AP exam have better retention rates at college and universities. That's why there's been a push for AP across the country. Students who are engaged in college-level rigorous curriculum typically have better outcomes in retention at college and university. So there's been a push to get more students into advanced placement coursework. And also 29% of the exams administered result in a score of 5 or higher, which is the scores for exams are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 being the highest. Schools will give college credit if it's in non-major college credit for exams that 4 and 5 traditionally. Sometimes the college will give college credit for a 3. This could lead to positive outcomes for students by graduating a semester early or maybe a year early, depending on how many exams they have. I think the key here when we talk about this is I think students believe that they take a certain number of exams or AP exams, that's going to get them some sort of boost relative to college admissions. The reality is college admission offices are changing how they actually select people and looking for people that are doing things beyond just advanced placement curriculum. So people think that's the answer to really selective college or acceptance or admissions. That's one of many factors now. So here's just a line graph of where we started, and I believe back when I started in the district in 05 and 06, I think we might have had about 140 exams, somewhere around there, total. We really did some work around providing access to students by eliminating prerequisites associated with PSAT scores, around critical reading especially. There was this feeling that when we did that scores would come down across the board. That was wildly untrue and proven to be false, and we had more access to students, and the scores continued to be really, really strong, and kids had really, really good experiences and feel like they're really prepared for post-secondary success for those that go on to college and university. So as you see, a general upward trend around number of tests and number of test takers.
This graph shows our scores versus national and Massachusetts, and you can see we are above the average both nationally and with the state of Massachusetts for every single exam we gave this year. So we did very well. And then this year, it just shows that 85% of students or 85% of the exams had a 3 or above. So that's, great news as well.
We also took a look at AP subscores reported by students through the College Board. And again, we took a look at the number of students who participated and reported out their race or ethnicity, the number of exams they participated, and the average or the mean score, and the total number of juniors and seniors by each ethnicity as you look left to right. And didn't make any comparisons relative to state or national. We didn't have that data, but we just figured it was important for us to really take a look at the demographics of people who are participating in these exams to ensure that we're providing the most opportunity for people. And it certainly is telling around, the scores are strong across the board. But it's just another data point that we looked at. Again, if you looked at our English language learners or students with disabilities participating in that, according to the College Board self-report, those were less than 5, so we could not report on those numbers. Again, looking at access around low income with fee reductions, College Board allows fee reductions for these expensive tests. I think the exam is somewhere around $94 or $96 now. We charge a little bit more to students because we have to pay for rental of equipment, tables, chairs, because we just don't have the facility to do that. For those that aren't familiar, we conduct these exams in our field house during the first 2 weeks of May, so it's pretty somewhat disruptive to the school, displacing PE classes and keeping the school quiet from about 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon as we do 2 testing sessions each day for those 10 school days. And then we also took a look at, again, for gender and how they compared male, female, and then their mean scores. And again, when students have another response other than male, female, it's less than 5, the scores aren't reported. Advanced placement scholars, this is really interesting. In 2022, we had 81 scholars, which is up from 2021. An AP scholar is granted to students who receive scores of 3 or higher on 3 or more AP exams. And a scholar with honors is granted to students who receive an average score of 3.25 on all AP exams taken and scores of 3 or higher on 4 or more of AP exams. The AP scholar with distinction is granted to students who receive an average score of at least 3.5 on all exams and the scores of 3 or higher on 5 or more of these exams. And the AP, national AP scholar is granted to students in the U.S. who receive an average score of 4 on all AP exams and scores of 4 or higher on 8 or more of these exams. So no APA national scholars this year from Shrewsbury High School, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because we're talking about 8 advanced placement exams. That's a pretty significant number of exams. But we have plenty of students who met the criteria for the 5 or more exams with AP scholars with distinction, which I think is really a remarkable feat.
So just to put in context the testing data, we do report this out, some of it, on our school profile. And the school profile is a very important document that is sent to colleges with every student's college application. And this, our school profile for Shrewsbury High School really is a way for college reps to understand the student in the context of the school they attend. Every high school is different. Every high school has different offerings. How GPA calculated is different for every school. So this really tells the college admissions where the student is, where the student is coming from. So on the profile, we have the community demographic, so they understand what community the student is living in, graduation requirements, course levels, academic, honors, AP, do we offer any other levels? Our GPA scale, which is very important for colleges to understand, our average scores for AP and SAT, and then future plans, which is the percent of students who go on to a 4-year college, a 2-year college, or who go on to the military work, etc. I attended a webinar this summer about the school profile from different colleges, and they couldn't say enough about the importance of this document and what they really want, sort of high schools to understand is that it's really should be 1 to 2 pages at most, because each application is read in 5 minutes, if not less. And so they want to see the most important information on a 2-page document. So we try to put everything we can on there to really highlight our community, highlight our school, so they understand our students.
We'd be happy to try to answer any questions you may have for us tonight. Thanks.
Thank you for all the information. Colleagues, what questions or comments, Mr. Palach?
Just a quick one, and I apologize because this is actually not about our own operations. I'm curious about the National Merit Scholarship. $2,500 feels like the number it's been for a decade. Has that moved at all? I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity, I'm sure, for students who qualify, but that feels like a drop in the bucket compared to what costs are for some of these programs. Has that, am I imagining that, or has that been fixed for like at least 10 years?
So my understanding it's been fixed. There are other opportunities. There are matching corporation scholarships that I think can get up to $7,500, but the general national merit is 25 with a definite match of 25 from college or universities. Some corporations will kick in more. I've seen as high as 7,500, but that's as high as I've seen.
Okay,
So it probably hasn't changed since you've been in high school.
thank you.
Ms. Fritz?
Just a comment really around the increase in the number, 111 more AP classes. So I think we've talked about, we're looking at mental health and stress and sleep, and we're looking at all these other things that affect students. And I know it seems that we still have that feeling or understanding, my students or families, that if I take all these AP courses, I'm going to get into these schools. And, you know, you've been talking about this for a couple of years with us, like trying to get that message through these families that it's important, but I think it's going to help them more maybe in the cost of college if they can have a semester or even some a year off because of the number of courses that they take.
So thanks for that. And two things I want to absolutely say, if anyone in the audience takes anything from this, if your student is looking to self-study, because we have students that want to self-study and kind of get ahead, those college admissions officers don't even look at self-study scores. If they're not offered by the school and taken it with a course, they don't even count it in your college admissions criteria. I think there's an idea that if I take as many self-study courses in AP I can on top of my college, on top of my high school schedule with all my activities, I'm going to gain access to these really prestigious elite universities. They don't even really look at that. They don't account for it. What they're looking for is, are you maximizing the rigor that you have within that school, and what else do you do? They're really moving away from the metrics piece. Metrics are important, and as Mrs. Flynn talked, the Georgetown stat was really compelling in the sense of the number of students who were admitted that didn't submit SAT scores at 7%. That's a pretty significant number when you think about it. And when you think about the participation rate with 52% in that 2021 year, right? Those are probably some of our highest performer students who are looking at some really top-notch schools. And as you see, the bump in the scores are a little bit higher, although the participation rate's low. So if anyone in the audience is sitting at home and saying like, well, I'm going to take, I'm going to self-study for my freshman year, my sophomore year, and I'll get all these, if it's not offered by the school, college admission officers don't really look at that. They kind of put that aside and look at the transcript, what's offered by the school, what do you take, and what else do you do? A real focus on service, volunteerism, something that you're passionate about, versus this menu of just, I took 5 APs, 6 APs, I did this. There's no real true menu. It's really about, we talk about fit all the time. It has to be a good fit. So again, applying to 7 to 10 colleges is probably the right number. You're going beyond that, it's really kind of a shotgun approach. You really got to start your search junior year and really focus on finding something you're passionate about. But it's a great perspective. I think we can't become chasing the AP exams. I think part of that is looking at what's right for your families and what's right for students and scoring well and getting a good experience versus being completely stressed out and overwhelmed, which happens.
And I like the fact that you talked about better retention, because with the rigor, a student may, get to school and do well, but we also hear from students from Shrewsbury High that a lot of them say, I get to college and I'm doing well, and I have counterparts who might have gone to a private school or something else somewhere else in the country, and they're not doing as well. So I think our students are well prepared regardless of what level of courses that they take. But I do like the part that there's the rigor of a higher level class is keeping the retention at colleges, because that's something we've looked at with students and coming out with a lot of bills, and they may not have even stayed at that school.
The other thing that's happening with the retention around college and university, and we've talked about this, is that the yield rates are lower at college and university, meaning the retention yield rate, they're allowing more people to enroll. There's more applications coming in because they're test optional. So this kind of pushback, what we're seeing is this we feel that there's going to be this pushback of SAT and ACT are going to become more relevant in the next few years based upon the number of students enrolled, the number of students leave, and they're trying to figure out what they can yield and have a retention rate, because they're seeing kids kind of wash out and not be prepared or not ready or don't meet the criteria around the college rigor. So it'll be interesting to see. The students I talked to or break that are away and came back have felt very well prepared in comparison to their peers, have felt school is, I don't want to say easy, but certainly that's come easier than some people that they live with. So that's a good, just anecdotal data, that's good for us, and that's kind of a consistent theme we hear. But it's going to be interesting to see how the SAT plays out. Like Purdue announced and MIT announced, and I think we're going to see more of those, kind of higher end schools kind of trying to weed people out by using some common metric. Initially, they got rid of SAT for this idea of having equity and trying to grant more access to people and diversify their campuses. What I've read recently is that some admissions people feel that is kind of shifted a little bit. In a sense, it's excluding people because people with higher socioeconomic status can provide students really rich activities, which if you're a really smart person that could score really well on the SAT, but you go optional, you have all these other experiences where if you score really well on SAT but don't have the experiences from a holistic view, then you're not getting the same kind of. So I don't know where it's going to go, but it's kind of interesting debate that's happening with in those circles, and it's certainly shifted in the last just couple of years.
Oh, in the
Yeah.
last year, really, every year it's become very different. So, the counselors and I make sure we go to as much professional development as we can. We're talking to college admissions offices. We actually have a junior parent night coming up January 26th. We'll have a panel of college admissions come in, talk to parents, about the college admissions process. So we try to keep up on that information and get that out to families and to help us, advise our students.
Great, thank you.
Just, I think you've kind of touched on this a bit, but just the appropriate grade level for AP courses, and starting, do you see any benefit? I know it's mostly junior and seniors at Shrewsbury High School. Is there any benefit, starting as earlier to try to get more kids involved in the AP program, or do you think it's, based on the data and research, that junior and senior years are the better years to be taking those classes?
Well, College Board will say, if you look at their information, that most of the classes, except for some, are really geared for juniors and seniors. They do have some classes, AP Seminar and AP Research, which is their AP Capstone program, can be for sophomores. I think there's AP World History, which for sophomores as well, AP Bio. So there's a handful that they will say that sophomores can take. I haven't heard any for freshmen. So I think I feel that it really is for juniors and seniors, maybe with an exception, some sophomores can take it, but I don't, I think it's better for students to sort of have that mature sense of, here's a college course, let's work our way towards that.
Yeah, in my perspective, we've really focused on grade 11 and 12 at the high school, and that's identified in the profile as well, that we only offer in grades 11 and 12. So that kind of, there's not opportunities for 10th graders to take it. I think there's a challenge for 9th graders coming in from 8th to 9th to kind of transition and figure that piece out. And then from 9th to 10th, I always say that sophomore year is kind of a tough year, because you're not a freshman and you're not an upperclassman. You're kind of like still trying to figure things out a bit. So yeah, there hasn't been a whole lot of, I haven't really supported the 10th grade. I don't think there's a lot of value in that, quite frankly. When you're talking a college level course for a 10th grader, you have to be really exceptional. Do we have some really exceptional students that could do it? Sure, but the percentage is probably less than under 1% of students could do that.
And that is stated on our profile, that only juniors and seniors are allowed to take AP courses. And I think that's important, so colleges understand that freshmen and sophomore aren't allowed, so that won't be something that they will, look at and think, oh, why aren't they taking an AP?
I appreciate all of this effort and the analysis. I'm wondering just as a question, and I very much appreciate the breakout by race and ethnicity and some of our more vulnerable populations that we want to be paying attention to. And I'm trying to make sure that I'm understanding some of the numbers. Self-report on SAT seems like it has a whole bunch of data challenges because of who self-reports and how do we do comparisons, and those who may choose for all sorts of reasons not to want to self-report that data. But if it's possible, if you don't mind going back to your slide on the AP self-report, that one, yeah. Can I just make sure I'm understanding this? Because there's a lot of numbers here.
Sure.
And so what I think I'm seeing, and I think why I want to ask questions, I think there's some good news in here. I have a harder time figuring out if there's good news or less good news on, again, as I said, on the SAT, given the self-report. But, okay, so we have the number of students who take courses, but that's different than the number of exams because a student can obviously enroll in multiple exams. I get that. But if I look at the total number of juniors and seniors, if I add up those top, let's say, 6 boxes, that should approximately equal the total number of juniors and seniors at the high school from last year. Am I right about that? They had to select a box, or they selected multi-race. Yeah? Which makes sense. Let me just keep going. What I'm trying to do is figure out, looking at the percent score on the side is hard to know unless I know what the percent of juniors and seniors are in each one of those ethnicity buckets, right? And so when I think about how to help tell a story here, or what is the story, it looks to me like that's saying there's about 1,041 juniors and seniors. That sounds about right. Like maybe we're off of a couple, or there's some, the no response. I don't, obviously we can't do anything with that. But what that tells me then, if I use your numbers, for instance, 35, oh my goodness, my eyes are blurring. 35 for Black and African American students is total juniors and seniors. That means that at the high school, they're about 3.4% of our total student body. That feels about right to you? That sounds about pretty close, right? It's under 5.
Yeah.
But yet 17% of them are enrolled in an AP course in their junior and senior year. That feels like a good news story. It's hard to tell it from the data right now, the way it is, and that the same seems to be true for Hispanic students. Again, sort of, groups that traditionally we want to make sure, are they exposed to opportunities where we see, I think it's about 8.3% of the students who are in the junior and senior class who are Hispanic. Lots of caveats there. And yet 21% of them, they're only 8% of the student body, but they're 21% of the total number of juniors and seniors. I'm not sure I'm interpreting that right, and so I welcome you to come back at me some other day and be like, no, that's not quite accurate. It also seems as though we have a pretty good news story on low-income students. Now that's different, and obviously you have a race and ethnicity and an income status, but that's about 16% of our student body, and about 14% are in an AP. If we considered being in an AP in your junior and senior year a good thing, and something we want kids to be exposed to, and that we think leads to them to being in being prepared for college level material, I think there's some good news stories here to pull out. I'm not sure I'm doing it right, and I'm doing math on my phone during the meeting, so this is, but I just want to make sure we're getting the story out there if there's something good to be saying here for populations, that the reason we disaggregate the data is to kind of pull out a trend, and if there's a trend here. So, as we go forward and we continue to kind of experiment with how to get all of this complex, and I appreciate your prior slide with Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, national, and there's just a lot there to kind of figure out. And so really appreciate the efforts that all of you go through, and then you have 7 different tests that you could look at, right, from PSATs to SATs. So there's a lot here, but I'm hoping I'm getting at least some of that narrative is a good story to tell.
Yeah, if it makes sense, I'll take a look
Yeah.
at this with Mrs. Flynn and I, and probably report back under separate cover to probably Dr. Sawyer around what we
Sure.
kind of interpreted to kind of tease it out for everybody.
That would be great. And I just want to, again, kind of appreciate the need to do this granular level of detail, and so that we can, ask questions of, are there certain groups that aren't enrolling? It seems like maybe there's something really good here, that we are seeing kids enroll, at least in taking the test, and hopefully, doing well on those things. So, all that to say, thank you for the effort. And as we try to get people to understand kind of what all these numbers mean, I hope we're finding places and bright spots to then ask, okay, if we're doing well here, but maybe not on another exam or an opportunity, why is that? So, thank you.
Well, it's our pleasure, and I think part of it is, and I referenced the beginning in 05, 06, where we had a very, very small number of students with really high prerequisites that limited access. By eliminating that and then pushing students to try it, our teachers supporting students along, like, you can do it, we know you can do it, you have to work certainly, but this is what's going to happen. If you put the work in, there's going to be good things that happen as a result. That's evidenced by our scores and evidenced by our scores and how students fare on these tests, but also a real tribute to our faculty who's really embraced the elimination of some of those barriers that we've had in the past and offering more to students and families. So it's a good news story, without doubt.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Sawyer?
No, thank you, and that's something that I think is important for us to continue to look at very carefully to make sure we're providing as much access as possible and that we don't have any blind spots when it comes to making sure that there are students who are capable and whom as Priscilla referenced, the research is pretty strong that even taking an AP course, even if you don't earn a qualifying score of 3, if you earn a 1 or 2, it still leads to better success beyond high school and at the college level. That access piece is something that's very important, and there's different ways different schools approach it around the country. But I think that by and large, we want to make sure we're providing all of our kids with access to the greatest extent that we can, and making sure that they have experiences that prepare them well. But I think this is overall a good news story. Appreciate the hard work that our educators do to prepare our students through these courses. SAT is not directly as correlated in terms of us preparing them directly, but the SAT has become more of a test over time, more similar to the ACT, that is more reflective of the quality of what you're receiving in your curriculum and your instruction at your high school level. And so all of this points that Shrewsbury High School students are qualify themselves really well among their peers in the state and nationally. As was mentioned by Ms. Flynn, gives us a profile as a school that provides really good opportunities for students to, based on whatever their profile happens to be, get the best look they can in a college admissions process that's really complex and really tricky. But obviously, as we know, year over year, as we had a report earlier, our kids are accessing, schools that are, difficult to qualify for, and that's a good news story. But I think as importantly, or maybe more importantly, they're being guided by their families and by their school counselors and their educators around what's a place where you can thrive and ultimately be successful and set yourself up well for life beyond college as well. So again, thank you. Appreciate all the work on the report and the presentation.
Great,
Thank
you.
Have a nice evening. And as was noted earlier by Dr. Sawyer, we're going to take the MCAS state testing annual report at our next meeting. And our next item on the agenda is under finance and operations, and this is for us to designate a person for school-based asbestos management. We will be seeking to take a vote this evening. All public and private K-12 schools must assign a person responsible for overseeing the management of asbestos-containing materials in school buildings, and this person is responsible, is called the, do we say that as an acronym? The AHERA, designated person? Thanks. We did receive a summary bulletin about that designation, and I understand we have a recommendation to designate Mr. William Tuttle, the division manager for the public buildings, as such a person. And Mr. Collins, thanks for being with us this evening.
Sure, and I would just add to that Mr. Tuttle, Bill Tuttle, was before the school committee previously. He received a promotion to the Public Buildings Division Manager, and as part and parcel of that role, he is responsible for the asbestos management program throughout the town. He recently completed the required training this past December, and so it's recommended that we pass the baton, so to speak, from Mr. Baldinger to Mr. Tuttle, given his new role. And you can see what his responsibilities are, which is basically identifying, maintaining log and management of any remaining asbestos in our schools. I'll just note that, of course, asbestos in construction trades was prohibited decades ago, and so we only have 4 remaining schools that have some small measure of asbestos in our schools, and it's safely contained and it's really, this is about appointing Mr. Tuttle to make sure that those small amounts that still remain are managed well into the future.
Thank you very much. I would note, too, that in addition to the materials that you provided us, you also provided us a copy of his certificate of having completed the required course. Any questions from the committee members? If not, then I would take a motion that the committee vote to appoint Mr. William Tuttle as our designated person for school-based asbestos management for all of Shrewsbury Public Schools.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor can do so by signifying with an aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you very much. We appreciate Mr. Tuttle's willingness. Next on our agenda is approval of our minutes. The minutes from December 14th, 2022 were provided to us in advance of this meeting. Do we have any questions, comments, or concerns regarding those minutes? Those can be then marked as accepted. And lastly, the committee will need to go into executive session this evening, and so we'll be doing so for the purposes of addressing Mass General Law 30A, 21A7, to comply with or act under the authority of any general or special law or federal grant and aid program known as Purpose 7, for the purpose of reviewing, approving, and releasing executive session minutes. Also, for the purpose of addressing Mass General Law 30A 21A3, known as Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigation position of a public body, and the chair so declares, as relates to Shrewsbury Educational Association's Units A and B, and or B, Shrewsbury Paraprofessional Association and the Cafeteria Workers Association, and Purpose 2, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiation with non-union personnel, to conduct collective bargaining sessions for or contract negotiations with non-union personnel, known as Purpose 2. Again, where deliberation in an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of a public body. We will return to open session only for the purposes of adjourning for this evening.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second?
Thank you. A roll call vote being required. Ms. Fritz?
Aye.
Mr. Wensky?
Aye.
Mr. Powledge?
Aye.
Ms. Boucher?
Aye.
And myself, aye. Thank you and good night.